What happens when the marriage you thought was your safest place gets ripped apart by a single sentence in a corporate lobby? A woman walks in as the CEO's wife and the guard doesn't just deny her. He laughs and says, "Ma'am, I see his wife every day." In that moment, it's not just betrayal that hits. It's the horrifying realization that someone else has been living your role so long an entire system now treats you like the outsider. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to her from the heart. What happens when the marriage you thought was your safest place gets ripped apart by a single sentence in a corporate lobby? I didn't know that was the question waiting for me that Thursday afternoon in early October. I was just a wife with a latte and a sandwich driving into downtown Austin under a white-hot Texas sun that turned every glass tower into a mirror. My name is Vesper Calloway Vess to the people who know me. I'm 56 years old, a CPA, with a small tax practice tucked into a quiet strip of shops in the suburbs. I've spent my life working with numbers because numbers don't lie. They add up or they don't. They reconcile or they don't. There's comfort in that. My husband, Bo Langston, runs Northline Meridian Solutions, CEO, corner office, board meetings, press photos, the kind of man who stands under spotlights and talks about vision and execution and disruption while I make sure our mortgage was paid on time and our pantry never ran empty. We've been married 28 years. For 28 years, I've believed in a simple division of labor. I kept our home steady so he could fly. I handled the predictable so he could handle the unpredictable. I never showed up unannounced at his office. I never crossed into the territory he called work. That was part of the respect, part of the trust. But lately, something had shifted. Bo had been coming home later and later. Texts that read, "Don't wait up," long nights. Dinners I ate alone at the kitchen island, the news murmuring in the background like company that didn't really care if I was there or not. That Thursday, I decided to do something small. Something that felt like love in the language I understood. I stopped at the coffee shop near my office and ordered Bo's usual triple-shot latte oat milk, no foam. Then I drove home and made him the turkey sandwich. He likes the one with thin sliced apple and sharp cheddar. It was nothing dramatic, just a quiet reminder that someone out there knew how he took his coffee and what kind of bread he preferred. I told myself I'd surprise him. Drop it off, maybe steal 5 minutes in his office. Be part of his world just for once. Northline's building rose out of downtown like something imported from another city's steel glass polished stone. I pulled into visitor parking and sat there for a moment, suddenly aware of how rarely I'd done this. Inside the lobby was colder than I expected. White light, chrome accents, floors that reflected everything back at you. People moved with purpose badges swinging from lanyards, voices low and efficient. I felt like I'd stepped into a different ecosystem, one that ran on ambition instead of routine. And right by the entrance, mounted at eye level, was a sign in black capital letters, "Authorized personnel only." I adjusted the strap of my purse and walked toward the security desk. The guard was a man in his late 30s, name tag reading Omar De Leon. He looked up politely, professional but relaxed. "I'm here to see Bo Langston," I said evenly. "I'm his wife." It was the kind of sentence I'd said in hospitals and banks and hotels. A simple identifier. A fact. Omar blinked, then he smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. Not rude, just amused. "Ma'am," he said, leaning back slightly, "I see his wife every day." My brain didn't process it at first. It slid past me like a misplaced decimal. "I'm sorry I asked." He chuckled softly as if we were sharing a joke. Then he lifted his chin toward the glass doors. "There she is," he said. "She's coming out right now." I turned. She walked through the doors like she belonged to the building. Mid-40s maybe. Tailored navy suit, hair pulled back in a low, sleek knot. The kind of woman who didn't rush because the world waited for her. Marlo Sutter. I knew her name from the company website. Chief Strategy Officer, the one Bo described as brilliant and a game changer. Omar straightened slightly when he saw her. "Afternoon, Ms. Sutter." She nodded at him in a way that spoke of routine. Habit. She swiped a badge across the reader without looking down. "Hey, Omar," she said lightly. "Bo asked me to grab a file. He's tied up in a meeting." Bo. Not Mr. Langston, not the CEO, just Bo. I felt something inside me tilt. Omar glanced at me again, clearly confused now that the two wives stood within 10 feet of each other. I could have corrected him. I could have raised my voice and said, "I am Vesper Langston. I have been married to that man for 28 years. Instead, I did something else. I smiled. "Oh," I said, keeping my tone smooth. I must have caught him at a bad time. "I'm a family friend. I just brought him something." I held up the latte and sandwich bag like proof of harmless intent. Marlowe's eyes settled on me properly for the first time. There it was, a flicker. Not surprise. Recognition. She knew exactly who I was. "Of course," she said after the smallest pause. "I can take that up to him." Her voice was warm, measured, executive, the kind of voice that filled conference rooms. I stepped closer and handed her the bag. "Would you tell Bo that Ves stopped by?" I said gently. "He'll know." Another microsecond of stillness, barely visible. But I've spent decades reading numbers for inconsistencies. I know what a discrepancy looks like. "I will," she said. Omar watched the exchange like he was trying to solve a math problem that didn't quite add up. I didn't correct him. I didn't claim my title. I turned and walked back through the sliding doors into the Texas heat. In my car, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there staring up at the mirrored glass that reflected the sky and nothing of what happened inside. In that building, there was a version of reality where Marlo Sutter was treated like the CEO's wife, where security knew her patterns, where she moved through restricted spaces without question. That wasn't an accident. That was infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't build itself overnight. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and said it out loud just to hear the sound of it. If they want me to disappear quietly, I'll stay quiet and let them show me everything. Then I drove home. The city kept moving like nothing had happened. Traffic flowed. People crossed streets. The skyline shimmered in the rearview mirror. But I felt as if I'd stepped out of my own timeline. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. "Don't wait up. Late night. Love you." I stared at the message longer than necessary. The words felt rehearsed now. Pre-packaged reassurance. The kind you send when you assume nothing is wrong. By the time I pulled into our driveway in Westlake, the house looked exactly as it always had. Clean lines, trimmed hedges, the porch light set to turn on at dusk. I walked inside and let the door close softly behind me. I moved through the house slowly, as if cataloging evidence. The wedding photo in the hallway, the trip to Napa, the anniversary cruise, the living room furniture we'd picked together when Northline first started to take off. How much of this was real, I wondered, and how much had been performance? I set my purse down and went about my usual routine, changed into comfortable clothes, started dinner even though I knew I'd eat alone. Around 9:30, I heard Bo's car in the driveway. He walked in the way he always did, loosening his tie, dropping his briefcase by the console table. "Hey," he said, voice tired but steady. "Sorry. Back-to-back meetings." I looked at him carefully. Same face, same familiar lines, same man I'd shared a bed with for nearly 3 decades. "Long day," I asked lightly. "You have no idea," he said, kissing my cheek. "Board prep investor call strategy session with Marlo. It's non-stop." There it was again. Her name folded into conversation like it belonged there. I kept my expression neutral. "I stopped by the office today," I said casually as I set a plate in front of him. He paused just slightly, not enough for anyone who didn't know him to notice, but I knew the rhythm of his breathing, the cadence of his movements. "Oh," he said, taking a bite. "Must have missed you. I brought you a latte," I added, "and a sandwich." He chewed, swallowed. "I didn't see anything come up." "No," I tilted my head. I gave it to Marlo, at the front desk. That was the moment. A fraction of a second, a recalibration behind his eyes. Then he nodded easy. "Polished." "Right," he said. "She mentioned someone had stopped by." "I've been slammed all day." Meetings stacked on top of each other. He didn't ask why I hadn't called him. He didn't ask what I'd been doing there. He didn't ask why Marlo was in the lobby handling things that felt personal. He didn't look confused, or indignant, or even mildly curious. He just integrated the information into his existing script and kept going. "That's good of you," he added. "You didn't have to do that." I watched him as he continued eating. The frightening part wasn't that Beau might be having an affair. It was that he was capable of absorbing exposure and redirecting the narrative without missing a beat. Like a CEO fielding a hostile question on an earnings call. Controlled, strategic, calm. So I said lightly, "How's Marlo handling everything?" "She seems busy. She's indispensable," he replied quickly. "Honestly, she's carrying half the weight right now." Indispensable. I filed that word away. I changed the subject after that, asked about investors, about projections, about anything that allowed him to keep performing his role. I didn't push, I didn't accuse, I let him believe the moment had passed. That night I lay beside him in bed. The ceiling fan hummed softly overhead. Beau's breathing evened out within minutes. He slept easily. I stared into the dark. 28 years teaches you the difference between guilt and calculation, between panic and planning. If Beau could stand in our kitchen, look at me after I'd walked into the scaffolding of his second life and remain that composed, then this wasn't chaos. This was design. Someone had already cleared space for another woman to be recognized by security, by routine, by language as the CEO's wife. And that kind of social reality doesn't happen by accident. I turned onto my side, listening to the steady rise and fall of his chest. "If he can perform this calmly," I whispered into the darkness, "then I don't need tears. I need proof." I didn't cry the next morning. I went to work. My office sits in a quiet shopping strip in Bee Cave, wedged between a nail salon and a pediatric dentist. Beige carpet, framed certificates, a coffee maker that sputters like it's always a little annoyed. It's not glamorous, but it's mine, and it runs on order. At noon, I closed my door, turned the sign to "In a Meeting," and opened my laptop. I can't argue with feelings, I said softly to myself. I can only argue with facts. That's the language I speak best. I didn't start rummaging through Beau's things like a desperate wife looking for perfume on a collar. I opened the joint credit card statements, the shared checking account, the business card he sometimes uses for client dinners. I scanned the past 3 months first. Nothing dramatic jumps out when you're looking for drama. It's always subtler than that. Then I saw it. Rue Lumiere, French bistro downtown. Intimate, dim lighting. The kind of place people book when they want to talk without being overheard. The charge was itemized. October 3rd, 7:12 p.m., 2 prix-fixe menus, 1 bottle of Bordeaux, 2016, a dessert sampler, total $412.67. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. October 3rd, that was the night Beau had texted me around 6:40. Dinner with a potential partner, big opportunity. Don't wait up. At 9:30 that night, I'd called him just to hear his voice. He'd stepped outside, he said. Still negotiating. We might land this. I opened my calendar and confirmed it. October 3rd. I'd even written in the margin, Beau. Big deal. There are certain details numbers don't hide. 2 tasting menus, 1 bottle of wine, dessert shared. That isn't a negotiation dinner. That's a date. I didn't let myself spiral. Instead, I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Vess, everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone light. "I was just thinking about that dinner you had with the potential partner a few weeks ago, the one at Rue Lumiere. Did anything ever come of that?" There was a pause, but not the kind that comes from panic. It was the pause of someone calculating. "No," he said smoothly. "They ended up going with another firm. Not worth the time, honestly. No irritation, no disappointment, no detail, just a clean answer." "Ah," I replied. "That's too bad." "Yeah," he said. "Part of the game." We hung up. If he'd sounded defensive, I might have felt vindicated. If he'd stumbled, I might have felt certain. But he didn't. He sounded like a man closing a file. I went back to the statement and began marking entries. Gas purchases nowhere near Northline's route. Parking garages downtown on nights he'd claimed late board prep. A midweek lunch at a high-end bakery he's never mentioned once in 28 years. Patterns. That's what I look for in audits. Not a single anomaly, but repetition. The following evening, I didn't accuse him. I made dinner. I asked about the market. I listened to him explain quarterly projections. At one point, he left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he stepped upstairs to take a call. I didn't touch it immediately. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close. Then I glanced, not at his email, not at his messages, at his calendar. There it was in blue dinner, 7 p.m., La Voliere reservation under Marlowe Sutter. 2 days from now. Below it, a repeating block every Tuesday at 8 a.m., coffee with M, every other Thursday. Dinner, Saturday afternoon, planning, no mention of clients, no mention of board, just blocks of time carved out with consistency. If Rue Lumiere had been one isolated dinner, I might have told myself it was a lapse, a moment. But calendars don't lie. They tell you what someone chooses to make space for. And Beau had made space. For her. I stepped back from the counter before he returned. My heart wasn't racing. It felt heavy, dense, like a file cabinet drawer pulled too far open. That night, lying beside him, I didn't ask whether he was having an affair. That question felt small now. The bigger one settled into me like a stone. If there's a woman who walks into his building every day and is recognized as the CEO's wife, then who am I in the architecture of his life? I had lived 28 years on trust. From that day on, I lived on documentation. I began photographing statements, not obsessively, systematically, dates, amounts, cross-references to his words. I wasn't collecting heartbreak, I was collecting evidence. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a colder thought began to take shape. If he's comfortable enough to schedule her weekly, he's not hiding an accident. He's building a life. The following Thursday, I stopped giving myself the luxury of doubt. It was still October. The air had cooled just enough to make evenings bearable. The house in Westlake looked peaceful from the outside. Inside, it felt like a stage. Beau came home at 6:15 p.m. That alone was unusual. Normally, he didn't walk in before 7:30, sometimes 8. He set his briefcase down and headed straight upstairs. I heard drawers opening, the faint click of cufflinks, the soft spray of cologne. When he came back down, he looked composed, not exhausted, not stressed, intent. His hair was more carefully styled than usual. He'd changed into a charcoal jacket I'd only seen him wear to formal dinners. A different watch, one he saves for special occasions. "You look nice," I said, stirring something on the stove. He smiled. "Figured I'd switch it up." "Big meeting?" I asked. "Always." He leaned against the counter for a moment, studying me. "Actually," he said as if the idea had just occurred to him, "what if we went out tonight, you and me?" Been a while. There it was. A spontaneous offer. Or a test. "Where would we go?" I asked lightly. He shrugged. "We could try that Italian place you like. Or maybe something new." He did not say La Voliere. His phone lit up briefly on the counter. I saw his thumb swipe across it quickly before the screen went dark. "You sure?" I said. "Thought you had that international call tonight." His jaw tightened just slightly. "Oh, right," he said, snapping his fingers like he just remembered. "Tokyo, 7:30. Completely slipped my mind. I tilted my head. If it's at 7:30, why leave so early? I need to prep. Board deck adjustments. Just vague enough." "Of course," I said. "Just vague enough." "Of course," I said, turning back to the stove. "I understand." He stepped behind me and kissed my cheek. "You always do," he murmured. At 8:20 p.m., I grabbed my keys. I told myself I was going for a drive, clearing my head. Downtown wasn't far. I took a route that wouldn't look suspicious if anyone ever traced it in their mind. The kind of drive someone could take without purpose. La Voliere sat tucked into a side street, its front washed in warm amber light. The kind of place couples choose when they want to feel chosen. I slowed as I approached the parking lot. And there it was. Beau's black Mercedes, parked near the entrance, 2 rows over a silver Audi I'd seen before in Northline's executive garage. I didn't need to see them inside. The cars were enough. I pulled into a spot across the street and turned off my engine. The world kept moving around me, waiters stepping out for smoke breaks, laughter drifting through half-open doors. Inside that restaurant, he wasn't prepping for Tokyo. He was living a parallel Thursday night. I sat there for several minutes. No tears, no hysteria, just clarity. The dinner on his calendar wasn't a one-off. It repeated. every other Thursday, like a standing appointment. His offer to take me out earlier hadn't been romantic. It had been strategic, a risk assessment. If I'd said yes, he would have pivoted again. The international call was a placeholder, a shield. I had wanted to believe there was still room for error. Standing in that parking lot staring at his car, I understood there wasn't. I drove home slowly. By the time I pulled into our driveway, something inside me had shifted from disbelief to calculation. I wasn't asking whether he was doing this anymore. I was asking how long, how deep, how much had been rearranged behind my back. As I turned off the headlights and stepped out into the quiet night, I realized something else. I was done asking, "Is this real?" From now on, the only question that mattered was, what else are they hiding? After the night in the Lavalier parking lot, I stopped looking for reassurance. I looked for structure. The next morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. I locked the door behind me, turned on the desk lamp instead of the overhead lights, and opened every account Beau and I shared. Checking, savings, joint credit cards, his executive card that occasionally fed into household reimbursements. I didn't allow myself to guess. I didn't allow myself to feel. I read the statements the way I would for a client under audit, line by line. The first pattern was restaurants, not just Rue Lumiere and Lavalier. There were smaller places, a tapas bar in East Austin, a rooftop lounge downtown, a boutique bakery on South Congress that Beau had never once mentioned to me. The charges lined up perfectly with nights he'd said board dinner or client retention. On October 10th, a $318 charge at a steakhouse. That same night, Beau had told me the board ran late and they ordered catering into the conference room. On October 17th, a $212 wine bar tab. He'd said it was drinks after a strategy session. The times matched the lies. Then came the gas purchases, not near Northline's office, not near our home, but near the lake, near downtown condos, near Blue Harbor. The names surfaced again when I scanned the bank transfers more closely. Monthly debit, Blue Harbor Residences, HOA. Monthly debit, BH Utilities. Another recurring payment, Blue Harbor Leasing Services. I sat very still. Our house in Westlake has been paid off for years. We have no rental properties, no vacation condo. And yet every month, like clockwork, money flowed towards something that sounded like an address. I opened the PDF details and traced the amounts. Consistent, predictable, like rent. I wasn't just being betrayed, I was financing it. On Tuesday afternoon, I drove by a high-end furniture store downtown after noticing a $4,800 charge 3 weeks ago labeled as interior decor. Beau had told me that day he was in all-day meetings. I walked inside casually and asked about a particular order number from the receipt. The sales associate pulled it up. Delivered to Blue Harbor Residences, Unit 214. I didn't react. I thanked her and left. That evening at our kitchen table, Beau told me about a call with Zurich that ran long. I nodded and listened. Later, when he stepped away to take another call, I opened his laptop again, not to invade messages, but to confirm what I already suspected. His calendar was full of blocks with neutral names: planning, review, check-in. They weren't labeled with Marlowe's full name anymore, just initials, or nothing at all. Tuesday 8 a.m., Thursday 7 p.m., Saturday 2 p.m., always recurring, always protected. It wasn't sloppy. It was coded. Corporate language had become camouflage. And then I noticed something else. A medical appointment reminder. Not on our shared calendar. On his private one. Consult, Hillcrest Women's Health. I stared at the screen. Beau had never mentioned going to a clinic like that. A few emails previewed in his inbox caught my eye as notifications popped up. Subject update beneficiary information. Subject follow-up on consultation. Subject asset division scenario draft. He closed the laptop before I could see more. He smiled at me across the counter. "You look tired," he said. "You working too hard." The audacity of it was almost impressive. I began writing down the phrases he used most often: meeting, client dinner, international call. Every time those words appeared, I cross-checked them with the statements. Without fail, there was a corresponding charge that belonged to a personal life, a dinner for two, a purchase for a home that wasn't ours, a payment to a building we had no reason to fund. This wasn't an affair that spiraled out of control. This was a managed transition. And I began to understand something chilling. He wasn't just preparing to leave. He was preparing a narrative, the distant wife, the incompatible lifestyles, the emotional drift, all while living a structured, scheduled, financially supported second marriage. By the end of the third day, I had folders on my desktop, labeled by date, receipts saved as PDFs, calendar screenshots, transaction logs. I didn't confront him. I made dinner. I asked about quarterly earnings. I laughed at something he said. I became the version of myself he clearly believed I was: stable, unquestioning, predictable. If he thought I was easy to manage, I would let him. Because if they could build a second life using our money and his calendar, then there was still a door I hadn't opened, and I needed to find it. 3 days after La Voliere, I found the door. It was in the junk drawer, the drawer in our kitchen that held batteries, expired coupons, a takeout menu from a place that closed years ago. I clean it out every few months. I always have. I pulled everything onto the counter and began sorting. That's when I saw it. A key I didn't recognize. Attached to a sleek silver keychain engraved with 2 words, Blue Harbor Residences. I held it between my fingers. Our house doesn't require a separate key fob. We don't own property anywhere else. There was no legitimate reason for that key to exist in my kitchen. I didn't wait. That afternoon, I drove downtown to Blue Harbor. It was a luxury complex near the lake. Glass facade, secured entry, landscaping too manicured to be accidental. I parked in visitor parking and watched. I've spent my career observing patterns in behavior and numbers. People are no different. At 5:47 p.m., a silver Audi pulled into the resident garage. Marlo stepped out, not dressed for a date, dressed like someone coming home. She carried a reusable grocery bag. She didn't glance around nervously. She walked with familiarity toward the elevator. I waited 10 minutes, then I followed. I took the elevator to the second floor. I took the elevator to the second floor. Unit 214. My pulse was steady. I inserted the key. It turned. The door opened. The first thing that hit me wasn't sight. It was scent. Not hotel clean. Lived in. Candles. Laundry detergent. Something warm and domestic. The living room was fully furnished. Couch. Throw blankets. Framed photographs. On the wall near the TV were photos from company events, Beau and Marlo standing close together, shoulders angled in, smiling in a way that suggested partnership. Not scandal. On the coffee table was a stack of books Beau had once claimed he didn't have time to read. In the kitchen, 2 matching wine glasses sat drying on a rack. The refrigerator held oat milk, his brand, the yogurt he prefers, the exact brand of sparkling water he buys. This wasn't a crash pad. This was a home. I walked into the bedroom. The closet held men's suits. His suits. Not temporary, not spare, pressed, organized. Beside them hung Marlo's dresses. In the bathroom, 2 toothbrushes rested in a ceramic holder. His electric razor sat plugged in. On the counter was a bottle of cologne I'd given him last Christmas. I opened a drawer in the nightstand. Inside lay a pair of cufflinks, silver, minimalist, the pair I gave him on our 25th anniversary. I had searched for them once, and he'd said he must have misplaced them. They weren't misplaced. They were relocated. They had moved forward into his next life. That was the moment my knees nearly gave out. They hadn't just taken time and bodies. They had taken history. On the desk near the window sat a manila folder. I didn't open it at first. I read the title, Future Plans. Below it, in smaller print, Asset Division/Strategy. I took out my phone and photographed everything. The folder, the room, the closet, the lease documents partially visible beneath a stack of mail addressed to Beau Langston, resident. I closed every drawer exactly as I found it. I stepped back into the living room and looked around one last time. This wasn't an affair apartment. This was a replacement household, a fully functioning duplicate. They weren't hiding in shadows. They were building a transition. I walked out quietly and locked the door. No one in the hallway saw me. No alarms went off. As I rode the elevator down, I felt something solidify inside me. I had found the door, Now I needed to understand exactly how they planned to use it, and how I would make sure I wasn't the one pushed through it. Saturday morning felt deceptively ordinary. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen counters in Westlake Landing on the same granite where I had once rolled out pie dough and helped Bo sort through business cards from networking events. The house smelled faintly of coffee. The dishwasher hummed. Everything looked intact, but I had already packed it up in my mind. I laid the evidence out across the table the way I would prepare for a high-stakes audit. Photographs from Blue Harbor closet rails lined with his suits, the twin toothbrushes in a ceramic cup, the framed company photos of Bo and Marlo standing close enough to suggest something permanent, printed statements showing monthly debits to Blue Harbor residences, HOA fees, utilities, furniture purchases tied to Unit 214, the Rue Lumiere receipt with the date and time circled in red, screenshots of his calendar dinner, La Voliere reservation under Marlo Sutter, coffee with M, repeating entries, and finally the images from the folder on the desk in that apartment. Future plans, asset division/strategy, consultation summary. I heard Bo coming down the stairs. He was dressed casually, weekend jeans, a pressed polo, relaxed, unaware. "We need to talk," I said before he could speak. Not sharp, not hysterical, just final. He paused, reading my face. "Okay," he replied carefully. "Now." I didn't ask him if there was anything he wanted to tell me. I didn't perform the ritual of pretending we were starting from the same reality. I pushed the stack of papers toward the center of the table. He didn't lunge, he didn't panic. He sat down slowly and began looking through the pages one at a time. There was no dramatic inhale, no apology forming at the edges of his mouth. After several seconds, he looked up at me. "How much do you know?" That was his first question. Not who told you, not what is this. How much do you know? He had prepared for discovery. He just hadn't expected it this soon. "Blue Harbor," I said evenly. "Unit 214, your suit's in the closet, 2 toothbrushes, the cufflinks I gave you on our 25th anniversary." He didn't interrupt. "I found the key in our junk drawer," I continued. "You should have moved it." A muscle in his jaw tightened, so he exhaled, leaning back slightly. "I guess things are moving faster than I planned." Moving faster, not crumbling, not falling apart, just accelerated. "You don't deny it?" I asked. He shook his head once. "There's no point." He folded his hands on the table. "Vess, this didn't happen overnight." I let the silence sit there until he filled it. "We've been drifting for years," he said. "You know that." "No," I replied. "I didn't. Because while you were drifting, I was married." He closed his eyes briefly as if collecting his thoughts before a board presentation. "Marlo understands my world," he said. "The pressure, the pace, the vision. And I don't." "You're safe," he said. "You're steady. But you don't move. You don't evolve. I can't stay in the same place forever." There it was. Not confession, justification. He wasn't a man who had betrayed his wife. He was a man who had outgrown her. I reached into the folder and slid the consultation summary across the table. He glanced at it and didn't flinch. I read aloud the bullet points without emotion. Emotional distance, social isolation, lifestyle incompatibility, narrative alignment prior to filing. "You wrote me like a case study," I said quietly. "Were you building a file on me?" "It's how these things are handled," he replied. "Cleanly, strategically. You mean carefully. I mean responsibly." I almost laughed. "Responsibly," I echoed. "You built a second household with our money. You scheduled another woman into your week like a recurring meeting. You coached security into recognizing her as your wife. And you call that responsible." His tone sharpened slightly. "I was going to tell you." "When?" He hesitated. "I had a timeline." "Of course you did." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't want a scandal," he said. "I didn't want the board thinking I was unstable. I needed this transition to look mutual." "Mutual," I repeated. "Yes, like we'd grown apart. No villains." I leaned forward. "If you were so certain this was the right path," I asked, "why did you need to script me as the problem?" He didn't answer immediately, because he couldn't. The truth hung between us. He didn't just want Marlo, he wanted legitimacy. He wanted to leave with his image intact, with his assets controlled, with his reputation unsmudged. I was going to file in a few months, he admitted finally, after the restructuring, after we repositioned leadership. It would have been cleaner. For who? For everyone. For you, I corrected. He didn't argue. I felt the last layer of illusion fall away. This wasn't about love, it was about risk management. You didn't get to live two lives and call it growth. You can leave, I said evenly. You can choose someone else. But you don't get to fund that choice with our money. You don't get to build a narrative that turns me into collateral damage. He rubbed his forehead. We can do this quietly, he offered. We don't have to escalate. I'm not escalating, I replied. I'm responding. I stood. On Monday, I'm meeting with an attorney. His eyes flickered. I'm separating our financial access within my legal rights. His jaw tightened. And I will not let you tell the world a story that paints me as the distant wife who didn't understand her husband's ambition. He pushed back from the table. You're going to blow up everything. You already did. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the kitchen, where we had once planned vacations and talked about retirement. I felt strangely calm. I understand now, I said quietly. I didn't just lose a husband. I gathered the papers back into a neat stack. I'm standing in front of a campaign. I met his eyes. And I will not be the casualty in it. Monday morning, I sat across from Elaine Rourke. Her office overlooked downtown Austin. Clean lines, no clutter. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out on her desk. The Blue Harbor photographs, the statements showing rent, HOA utilities, the furniture invoices, the restaurant receipts, the calendar screenshots, the consultation summary. Elaine leaned back slowly. This was planned, she said. Yes, the good news, she continued, is that you found out before he filed. That matters. It matters a lot. She tapped the statements. He used marital funds to support a second residence. That complicates his position significantly. We walked through each document like surgeons. She explained the strategy clearly. You file first, she said. You control the narrative. Can he move assets? Not if we move quickly. We'll request preservation of marital property. We'll separate access where appropriate. I nodded. For the first time since the lobby of Northline Meridian, I felt something close to stability. I wasn't reacting. I was executing. By that afternoon, Elaine had drafted the petition. Grounds irreconcilable differences, supporting documentation attached, financial irregularities noted. The filing went in before Beau could adjust his plan. When he was served, he called me immediately. You went behind my back, he demanded. I learned from the best, I replied. The second move wasn't about revenge. It was about governance. I compiled a concise summary of concerns and called Graham Pettit chairman of the board. I have information relevant to corporate governance, I said carefully. Specifically regarding undisclosed conflicts of interest and resource allocation. I didn't mention toothbrushes. I mentioned policy. Undisclosed personal relationships between executive leadership, potential misuse of corporate influence to position an individual, strategic restructuring discussions tied to private plans. Graham was quiet for a long moment. Send what you have, he said. Within a week, Northline initiated an internal review. Beau came home furious. You had no right to involve the board, he said. You had no right to blur the lines between personal and corporate power, I answered. You're destroying my career. You compromised it. He stared at me like he was seeing a version of me he hadn't budgeted for. The review didn't accuse him of crimes, but it did uncover failure to disclose a personal relationship with a direct strategic subordinate. Marlowe was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Beau's signing authority was temporarily limited. For the first time in years, he was no longer fully in control. 3 months later, the divorce negotiations were in full swing. Because I had filed first, because the financial records were clear, because the second household was documented, Beau had little room to maneuver. The Blue Harbor lease was terminated early. The HOA payments stopped. The furniture was liquidated. Assets were divided with adjustments for documented misuse of marital funds. The board retained Beau in a reduced capacity under increased oversight. His title remained, but his autonomy shrank. As for Marlowe, the relationship that had thrived in secrecy struggled in daylight. Pressure has a way of exposing foundations. 6 months after everything began, I moved into a smaller townhouse near Lake Austin. It wasn't grand, but it was honest. I made my own coffee in the mornings, ate dinner without guessing where someone else was. One evening my phone rang. Bo, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I answered. His voice sounded older. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For how I handled it. He paused. I ended the marriage in my head a long time ago. I know, I said. I should have told you. Yes. Silence stretched between us. You had the right to change, I said finally. You didn't have the right to rewrite me to justify it. He exhaled slowly. I never meant to make you a villain, but you were willing to. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I don't hate you, I said. I just won't be managed. When I hung up, I felt no triumph, just closure. Weeks later, I met Noelle at a community fundraiser. She was kind, direct, unimpressed by titles. She asked about my work, not my history. We took things slowly, no grand declarations, just conversation, shared walks, evenings without strategy. One afternoon, as I stood outside my new home, I thought back to the sign in Northline's lobby. Authorized personnel only. For years, I had waited for permission to be included, to be seen, to be valued. Now I understood something. I no longer needed authorization to enter my own life. I once believed losing my husband would mean losing everything. But what I actually lost was a role, and what I gained was myself. There are moments in life when what breaks us is not the betrayal itself, but the quiet realization that we had been slowly erased. And yet, even in that kind of ending, something else begins. We learn that dignity does not shout. It simply stands. We learn that love without honesty cannot last, but self-respect can. And sometimes losing the role we once fought to keep is exactly how we find the person we were meant to become. If this story resonated with, you know that you are not alone in whatever chapter you're walking through. If you'd like to stay connected to stories like this real layered human, consider subscribing. It's not just about following a channel. It's about being part of a space where we listen to one another with care. And if you feel comfortable, leave a few lines in the comments. Share what this stirred in you, or simply where you're listening from. I read more than you might think. Thank you for spending this time with us. Take care of your heart, be gentle with yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.